Hello? Okay, we're on. Hold on. Okay, guys. Uh, this is part 5 of Zionism, Mormon Zionism, and part 12 of the full Mormonism and Judeo-Freemasonry. We have been reading the text American Proto-Zionism and the Book of Lehi, Recontextualizing the Rise of Mormonism by Don Bradley. It came out of Utah State University. It's his thesis project. And we've been reading about, well, before I get into that, let me do what I always got to do, and that is to let you guys know that I'm on partial shadow ban. So if you go to vincentbrunoshadowban.blogspot.com, it's at the bottom of the screen and in the description box. And can you hear me? Yeah. Um, just, yeah. Let me just make sure you can hear me right now while I'm like this. Hold on, I'm doing something. Sorry, guys. The beginnings of my streams are a little bit hectic. I just want to make sure you can hear me right now. Yeah, you can. Okay. Let me just get the video posted on my blog and post it on my timeline so that people can find it, because my channel's really small now. I used to have a big channel, but they took it down, so hold on. Got it. Hold on one second. Let me just get this link and post it where I need to post it, and then we'll start. Hold on. Yeah, I'm really interested about what I've been learning about Mormonism. I'm fascinated now. It's absolutely fascinating. Especially this whole Zionist angle, which I will, if you haven't been watching, I will, what's it called? I will explain what we've gotten up to so far. I'm almost done just putting this up on my blog. Okay, it's on the blog, and then I just need to post it on my Facebook timeline, and that's it. Let me find it. Hold on. Hold on, almost done. Just need to get the thing and then post it on my Facebook, and then I'm ready. Hello, can you hear me? Yes, you can hear me. Okay, so we've been reading out of this text on Zionism, Mormon Zionism. So what was happening around the time that Joseph Smith was formulating the beginning doctrines of Mormonism, there was both Christian and Jewish Zionism going on in America. So both Christians and Jews wanted Jews to come over to America, settle here in as a middle ground between Eastern Europe and moving to Jerusalem and creating the New Jerusalem. So the Christians wanted the Jews to convert to Christianity and come here and live in a New Jerusalem, whereas the Jews wanted to create a Jewish New Jerusalem in America, and from there, then emigrate to real Jerusalem over in Israel. Um, um, and this was going on a lot, and they were trying to make Jewish settlements around the area where Joseph Smith lived. Basically, the rabbis were saying, well, you have really no religious authority to be doing this. There's nothing in our scriptures that says that anything is going like this is going to happen. So the argument of this person who wrote this thesis is that, you know, so far what I've read is that Joseph Smith was basically trying to create a religion that would give a religious scripture and give prophetic reasons for Jews to come to America. And very interesting that it wasn't just Joseph Smith who thought that the Native Americans were the last lost tribes of Israel. All these, you know, Christians and Jewish Zionists in America at the time believed it. So this wasn't his own quirky idea. This was something that, you know, people were spitting around at the time. So anyway, let me get going, and then we are going to continue with Billy Crone. We're on part 2 of his Mormonism. Like Mordecai Noah, so this is the building of the Temple of Nephi and a New Jerusalem at Palmyra, Manchester. Like Mordecai Noah, the earliest Mormons seem to have anticipated establishing a New Jerusalem in western New York. However, unlike Noah, who proposed his New Zion on an island situated where the Niagara River emptied into Lake Erie, they apparently intended to build theirs around a temple they expected to erect on the Golden Plates Hill, their American Mount Moriah. Of course, this might surprise Latter-day Saints and students of Mormon history, who will recall that Joseph Smith's revelations identified Independence, Missouri as the location for Zion, but this identification was not made until 1831. An early of September 1830 revelation implies that the location of New Jerusalem had been a subject of disagreement and controversy among the saints. When Book of Mormon witness Hiram Page wrote revelations on building the New Jerusalem, Joseph Smith's September 1830 revelation countered, dismissing Page's revelation as unauthorized and declaring that it is not revealed and no man knoweth where the city Zion shall be built, but it shall be given hereafter. Joseph Smith's revelation excluded a Palmyra, Manchester location for the city by identifying the proper location as in the vicinity of Indian Territory on the border of the Lamanites. This countering of Page's revelation with an Indian Territory site for the New Jerusalem suggests that Page's revelations assumed a location closer to his upstate New York home. The identification of the Manchester Hill as Cumorah and of the Independent, Missouri as the New Jerusalem occurred so early in Mormon history that the earlier understanding of the hill as ancient temple site and Palmyra, Manchester as the New Jerusalem were overshadowed and must now be inferred from early historical records. Nonetheless, they can be inferred from converging lines of evidence. John H. Gilbert recalls Martin Harris stating at the E.B. Graddon print shop in Palmyra that the New Jerusalem was to be built there. This claim by Martin Harris, made during the negotiations for printing the Book of Mormon, was independently recalled by William Van Camp, editor of Leon's Gazette. Van Camp remembered Harris identifying Palmyra as the New Jerusalem in conjunction with a nearby hill, presumably the Golden Plates Hill, at Grandin's shop while he Van Camp worked there as an apprentice. Closer to the events, one of the earlier newspaper articles on Mormonism, published in August 1829, expressed the same understanding. A now lost piece published by Jonathan A. Hadley in his anti-Masonic newspaper, the Palmyra Freeman, appears to have described Mormon plans to rebuild or build the Temple of Nephi. And it was interesting that it was an anti-Masonic paper. Abner Cole echoed Hadley's information about the Mormons building the Temple of Nephi in an article of his own, while fastidiously referring to the Palmyra Freeman as the New Jerusalem reflector. Cole's equation of Palmyra with the New Jerusalem threats treats these designations as interchangeable and implies that the Freeman article had announced that the New Jerusalem Temple of Nephi it referred would be built at Palmyra. It should be asked from what the Freeman's editor acquired his information. Hadley's source was likely the same as that of John H. Gilbert and William Van Camp. Martin Harris in 18 John H. Gilbert and William Van Camp Martin Harris. In the summer of 1829, Harris visited various newspaper printers in the Palmyra area, including the Granson shop, where Gilbert and Van Camp worked to persuade these establishments to print the Book of Mormon. Gilbert and Van Camp both heard Harris identify Palmyra as the site for the future. New Jerusalem at E. Grandin's print shop. One second. Hmm. However, Grandin was not the only printer Harris visited to negotiate the Book of Mormon's printing. Harris was an anti-Mason and subscriber to the Palmyra Freeman, may have preferred to have the book printed by Hadley instead of by the pro-Masonic Gandin. Interesting. However, it goes into we're going to be talking about secret combinations and the possibility that early Mormonism was an anti-Masonic conspiracy, but just good to know. Hadley refused. Harris had visited Hadley in an attempt to persuade him around the same time he first visited the Gandin shop, just 2 months before Hadley published his article identifying Palmyra as the site for the Mormons' New Jerusalem. Harris thus appeared to have told Hadley, in addition to Gilbert and Van Camp, that Palmyra or Palmyra Manchester was to be the site of the New Jerusalem. This point he doubtless thought would help persuade them to publish the book, since having their city transformed into the biblical New Jerusalem would surely have been good for business. Hadley was thus able to provide the earliest glimpse of Mormon intentions to build a New Jerusalem and a temple, information echoed by Cole. The information they passed on from Martin Harris discloses what believers in the Book of Mormon apparently initially expected from the temple and the New Jerusalem, that they would rebuild a temple that had first been built millennia earlier by Nephi atop the Manchester Hill, and then build the New Jerusalem around it. The probable earliest Mormon center of gathering was, advantageously located along the aquatic highway system comprised by the Great Lakes and Erie Canal. However, unlike Noah's gathering place, this site was selected with a spiritually compelling rationale. It held not only material benefits in the here and now, but also significance in the sacred past. Conclusion. As we have seen in the earliest years of the Mormon movement, Joseph Smith, Martin Harris, and other adherents of the Book of Lehi were American Proto-Zionism, where American Proto-Zionism on the model of Mordecai Noah, and thus, like him, were forerunners of modern Zionism. The earliest Mormons probably understood the purpose of their movement to be in many ways the same as Noah's purposes, gathering the Jews and American Indians into a united New Jerusalem in Western New York, with the distinction that they perceived their movement as having divine authorization to build the New Jerusalem and prophetic means for determining its appointed location. Although, if this is true of the Mormon sense of mission in 1827 to 1828, what happened? How did the earliest Latter day Saints come to abandon the New York Zion in favor of one in Indian territory and to shift from the work confirming the Old Testament and gathering Jews to that of restoring the New Testament church and focusing their gathering efforts on the natives? Chapter 5 of this work will attempt to answer the questions explaining how the Mormon movement transformed from a proto-Zionist endeavor to a distinct religion in its own right. First, we will explore more fully the Book of Lehi's reconstructed contents and how they fit the Mormon movement's early proto-Zionist character and purpose. Okay, so we're going to be starting. Let's Okay, wait. All
Okay,
right,
I'll
I'll
be
be
back.
back. Let's watch the video.
Amen. We are once again our study, World Religions, Cults, and the Occult. And that's right, we're going to have a little experiment tonight. Go ahead, if you can, take your exciting workbook, hold it over your head. Once again, let's do this exciting little ritual. Say, I love my workbook. Yes, I do. I'm not going to use it tonight. Scooby-Dooby-Dooby-Doo. There, now that we've got some more time for some folks to get in here. We are once again in our topic. The 8th topic, that's right, is called Mormonism. And just by way of recap, we are just getting started, and we're going to we're still dealing with kind of the history, the background of Joseph Smith and Mormonism. We've already saw last time we were here, if you were into this, the first one, the whole premise of Mormonism. How do you decipher that this thing is true or not? Well, it's all based on a feeling, which is a perversion of the James 1:5 text. Okay, that you get, how do you know it's true? You don't do a Berean, you don't check it with the Bible, you just got a burning in the bosom, which could be rotten pizza, chicken, pick your food that gives you heartburn. That's not how you decipher truth. But that's the basic core premise of it, which tells you right out of the gates, hey, that's a problem. Really? I'm just going to go by feelings to discern something wrong? Feelings can deceive you. Also, which account, Mr. Joseph Smith, and which version, Joseph Smith, and how many different times did you change? If this is supposed to be true and a more accurate, and as he says, the Book of Mormon, the most accurate books of the whole planet that could lead you better to God than any other book, then why are there so many different accounts? And that's historically verified. Speaking of which, even with the Book of Mormon, as we will see later in greater detail, Book of Mormon doesn't even agree with the other writings that they have. So there's no consistency there. And speaking of which, no archaeological evidence, period. If this is really factual and this really happened and really came from God and God doesn't lie, then how come we can't find nothing? We find zero, no coins, no animals, no dead bodies of these thousands upon tens of thousands, if not millions of people dying in these. We find nothing. Okay, then we saw, of course, the word Mormon, right? The whole thing, I'm telling you guys, is we're going to get into this even more so tonight. We're going to see that Joseph Smith in a nutshell, and I don't know how any other way to put it, just being blunt, but just the guy's a liar. He's a liar, and he is a fantastic storyteller. Okay, but as we will progress, he's not just a storyteller, like he's got a vivid imagination. He rips people off. He rips it off, we're going to see tonight, in Freemasonry. He rips it off of even current accounts. Okay, the guy just put a bunch of mishmash stuff together, and that's where it comes from. And we're just dealing with the evidence, okay? But Mormon, we saw, comes from, believe it or not, that's not something no shake. It doesn't mean more good from the Reformed Egyptian, as some would say. Excuse me, that was a word used back in his day to the boogie monster, the she monster. Okay, that was used during his day. And in the Oriental, they got a problem with that. It means Devil's Gate. So they don't typically use that when they're witnessing to Orientals, because that's what it means. And we left off, it is extremely racist. Okay, as we will see eventually when we get into other cults that arrived about the same time frame, the birth of Mormonism. You also have the birth of Seventh-day Adventists, Christian Science, a lot of the charismatic fringe groups. Okay, you're going to see that they were extremely racist, a lot of them as well. Especially with Ellen G. White and her doctrine of amalgamation, where her version of the Black African race was, he would say that Black Africans are cursed because they stayed neutral in this thing. She comes up with a doctrine called amalgamation, still on record, believe it or not, Seventh-day Adventists, and that she said that they are derived from amalgamation from bestiality. Very, very racist. Same thing you got here with Mormonism, complete heresy, obviously, just crazy. And that's the kind of stuff that they want to keep hidden from you. And that's what we see with Joseph Smith, and they just try to cover these records up. And when they come knock at the door, they sure don't tell you this stuff, okay? Then we left off with just a little bit of a teaser with the occult ties. We're going to get in a little bit of that tonight, and then, Lord willing, also next week, Lord willing. And then we're leaving with tonight with a couple questions. All right, with all that said, okay, that's not a good track record. It ain't looking good, okay? But if you talk to Mormons, they just got this oozing love of Joseph Smith. In fact, he's supposed to be even better than Jesus, right? And remember we saw before in the video that Joseph Smith, that they believe that when people die, you're going to stand before the judgment seat, and Joseph Smith is going to be there. So this guy, he's the guy, right? He's supposed to be the great prophet. In fact, they make him out to be like, to quote, the lamb led to the slaughter. And so that's the question. Was Joseph Smith really, number one, was he really a martyr? Right? He was just some guy, just had this truth, this genuine so-called vision, and unfortunately, the people just shot him. He was just trying to, but he surrendered his life. No, it's a lie too, big lie. In fact, wait till you hear who shot him. But let's get into that. After the publication of the Book of Mormon, Mormonism, unfortunately, is my word there, began to grow. Because their religion was so deviant from Christianity, plurality of gods, polygamy. Joseph, we'll get into this in much greater detail, was said to have up to 27 wives. Okay, and that's part of the reason why people hunted him down. He was sleeping with their wives. Persecution soon forced them to move from New York to Ohio, then to Missouri, and finally Nauvoo, Illinois. Okay, and he was shot and killed not too far from Nauvoo. Nauvoo was right there on the I believe the Illinois, Iowa kind of corner border there with the Mississippi, just a little bit inland, about a half-hour drive car. I don't know how long it takes to walk or use a horse back then. How many of you guys realize they didn't have cars back then? Praise God, you're discerning Christians, all three of you. The rest of you, wow, I'm glad you're here. Maybe we should start back with the Discipleship 101 studies, but I won't go there. But anyway, so it's about a half hour away, and that's where he eventually died. But so he's in there in the Nauvoo, Illinois. People are chasing him down. Right? This guy's, what in the world? What? Okay. Anyway, so but after being accused of breaking some laws in Nauvoo by destroying a printing press that was supposed to be publishing harmful information about Mormonism, Joseph and his brother Hiram ended up in jail. A mob broke out into the jail and killed Joseph and his brother, and that's where they'll say, "Oh yeah, that's what happened." But it was just a lamb led to the slaughter. God was there just trying to tell the truth, and people took him out. And bad. No. Let's get into the real history of what happened. And this is historical record. This is easy to demonstrate. I don't know why they would even try to dispute this. Well, actually, I do know why, because the guy was not a martyr. Okay, but anyway, and I quote, the events leading to the death of Mormon founder Joseph Smith are, quote, much like the events surrounding his life. Their word, not mine, full of contradiction. Okay, to hear Mormons tell a story, Smith did no wrong. But let's take a look what happened and caused his death. Quote, when an opportunity to murder Smith finally came, and this is a historical record, it grew paradoxically out of the events within the Mormon church. Mormons hunted him down, right? That's what, hey, wait a second. You didn't tell me that when you came knocking at the door. What's going on with that? Well, and here's why. A conflict over the issues of plurality of wives and him sleeping with other guys' wives, even other Mormon guys' wives. In fact, he would tell them that you have to, let me sleep with your, I mean, again, we're going to probably have a whole study just on polygamy and their beliefs with them, and him and Brigham Young. But the conflict arose over that, other extreme doctrines and things of that nature. And this was within the circle of Mormon leaders, right? And it broke in about 1844 in the spring there. And these were some prominent men. This wasn't just some fringe Mormons, whatever, the guys that had no power and authority. This was within their main structure that began. There's led by a guy named William Law, and he was a member of the first presidency since 1841 at that time, and others. And there's a whole bunch of listed names there. But they broke off from Joseph Smith, Mormons, and they resolved to publish their views and to, quote, expose the secret things that were going on in the Mormon hierarchy and in a newspaper, right? They decided they didn't have the internet. They didn't have blogs. I'm going to get the word out, right? So what did they do? They didn't have TV. There was no radio. Well, it's newspapers, right? So they started a newspaper. It was called the Nauvoo, right, Expositor. And on June 7th, they issued the first and the only edition of their paper that included exposing what was going on with Joseph Smith. Now, in response, Joseph Smith, who, by the way, conveniently happened to be Nauvoo's mayor, right, and also had control of the Nauvoo City Council, wanted to declare, they voted to declare the paper that these guys who broke off to him as a, quote, public nuisance, and they sent an order to the city marshal to, quote, you are commanded, this is a direct quote, you are commanded to destroy the printing press from whence issues the Nauvoo Expositor, and scatter the type of said printing establishment in the street, and burn all expositors and libels handbills found in said establishment. Whew, man, that English back then was a challenge. But anyway, and of course the act was carried out and ordered on June 10th. So the way he did, these guys said, that's it, we're going to tell people what's really going on here. Mormons breaking off from Joseph Smith. Joseph Smith responds with his power being the mayor and having control of the city council. They said, nope, that's it. They told the city marshal, go there and destroy that printing press. Well, that's where the fight really began, because these guys reacted back. And again, this is Mormon against Mormon, right? Now, this caused the publishers to go to the nearby town of Carthage, right? So again, this is Nauvoo, Carthage, about a half-hour car ride inland, right? And to obtain an arrest warrant for Smith, because he's the one that ordered to destroy their property and their stuff and the newspaper, and charged them with riot, Joseph Smith and the council there. So the municipal court of Nauvoo, composed of Mormons who were sympathetic to Joseph Smith, they didn't see that way, and they acquitted him and the other that were accused. Then they were examined by a guy named Justice Daniel Wells, and again they were acquitted. But because Wells did not have authority in such case, this led to a third examination, and this too ended up with the defendants being found not guilty. So they're getting nowhere, right? However, Joseph Smith, if you will, makes a fatal error. He sought the help of Illinois governor, right? Goes over their head, Governor Thomas Ford, and in order to have this matter settled, Ford believed that Smith and the others who were originally charged should submit themselves to the constable at Carthage, right? Maybe it would have died down right there, but he goes to the governor. Joseph Smith does, right? And then they need to go there, he says, and await trial. Now, in that letter, the governor of Illinois, Governor Ford, he promised Joseph Smith and the others that they would, quote, be protected from violence, right? Now, remember, the whole premise is Joseph Smith was an innocent lamb led to the slaughter. He had nothing to hide. He was just standing for the truth. Well, first of all, after that letter from the Illinois governor, quote, refusing to believe the governor's promise, Smith made plans to escape capture and flee to the Rocky Mountains. So much for being a martyr. Right? So initially, your knee-jerk reaction was, I got to get out of here. Right? But he did return to Nauvoo, spent the night, and in the morning was told he had to report to Carthage again, have our car drive, about 10 in the morning. So he and his brother Hiram, Joseph Smith and Hiram, rode into Carthage and turned themselves into the local authorities. They checked into the local hotel, but they were met by the constable, who says, no, you're not staying in a hotel. I put him under the arrest and went to the jail. Now, the jail, again, is kind of glamorized, like, oh, no, it's horrible. It was kind of more of a, not what we would consider a jail, but whatever. But anyway, so on the afternoon of June 27th, remember, this guy's supposed to be a lamb led to the slaughter. This is a direct quote, Elder Cyrus H. Wheelock came in to see us. And when he was about leaving, and this was Joseph Smith, his brother Hiram, the guys that were in this so-called jail, when he came in to see us, and when he was about leaving, that's their grammar not fine, drew a small pistol, a 6-shooter, from his pocket, remarking at the same time, quote, would any of you like to have this? And Joseph Smith, the lamb led to the slaughter, said, absolutely not. No, sirree, I'm just going to stand for the truth because this is genuine. Are you kidding me? Here's what he did. Brother Joseph, quote, immediately replied, yes, give it to me. Where he grabbed the pistol, okay, and put it in his pantaloons pocket. The pistol was a 6-shooting revolver. Now, soon afterwards, a number of men from the town, who were they? Right? Coming around the corner into the jail. They're climbing up the stairs. Right? It was up on the second floor, apparently. And immediately, William Richards and Hiram Smith, Joseph Smith's brother, leaned against the door to prevent the mob, right, from entering the room. Again, gives you an idea. It wasn't like a jail cell and walked in. You can't get us, right? So, but anyway, so, quote, while in this position, so they're leaning against the door, Joseph Smith's brother and this other Mormon guy, the mob, who had come upstairs, tried to open the door, probably thought it was locked, and fired a ball, the shot, through the keyhole, probably trying to bust it open, thought it was locked. At this, Dr. Richards and Brother Hiram leaped back from the door with their faces towards it. Almost instantly, another ball passed through the panel of the door and struck Brother Hiram on the left side of the nose, entering his face and head. Hiram fell back and cried out, I'm a dead man. Well, that's Joseph Smith's brother. And so as a lamb led to the slaughter, he just stood there and says, oh, wow, that's too bad. But you know what? I'm going to stand tall as a man. And, yeah, you know where I'm going, Bobby. Are you kidding me? Joseph Smith, they shot his bro. So what'd he do? Man, he goes wild. Instantly, and this is the historical record, he instantly arose with a firm, quick step and determined expression of countenance. You want to translate that? I'm going to kill you. Yeah. And he approached the door. He pulled the 6-shooter from his pocket, opened the door, snapped the pistol, he unloaded the whole thing. Only 3 of the barrels, however, were discharged, so 3 more duds. Afterwards, though, I understood that 2 or 3, the guy giving the account, 2 or 3 were wounded by these discharges, 2 of whom I informed died. That's the account. That's the historical record. So there's no like, I'm just standing there, they just came and got me for nothing. No, it's Mormons within your own camp, as we'll see later, hanging with their wives, sleeping with their wives, telling them they got wives. So there's all kinds of weird stuff going on, to put it mildly. Right? And they come to take you out. isn't just over the newspaper, right? And I'm not condoning what the other people did, but he wasn't standing there just, oh, and you look at the artwork, it's this perversion of the facts. Once again, as the guy their word says, just like this whole background, how he supposedly died, the whole thing's a contradiction. It's completely untrue. And that's what one guy says. Smith accepted the offer of Wheelock's pistol. From that moment on, everything changed, making a comparison to an innocent lamb or willingly martyr a, quote, perversion of the facts. He decided to use the pistol, which means he did not have any intention to voluntarily lay down his life. And again, his first knee-jerk reaction was, go to the Rocky Mountains. Once again, escape, just like all the other patterns from Ohio to Illinois, etc. Blah, blah. Smith's, no, wait, I can't do that one yet. It gets really weird. But anyway, so typically, and let's contrast that, right? Lamb led to the slaughter. Look at us, Christian martyrs. He's supposed to be a Mormon martyr. Christian martyrs are known for willingly and peaceably giving their life for the cause of Christ, right? Remember in our study with Roman Catholicism, the last section? Remember the accounts of our fellow brothers and sisters in Christ being burned alive, drowned, even after they're dead. They get so mad at them that they dig up their bones and burn them and ash them and throw their ashes in the water. Oh, you really got me now. But anyway, but oftentimes when they're being led to the stake, what do they do? They're singing hymns to praise to God. They're witnessing, trying to lead their captors to Christ. That's a lamb led to the slaughter. Okay, that's not what's going on here. Okay, that's what we see with genuine Christians, okay? Not fighting back and just letting, if you will, the chips lie where they may. There's no escaping the fact that Joseph Smith, was guilty of being involved in the destruction of the expositor, and history has shown that many accusations made in regarding Smith's secret involvement with polygamy were accurate. It is, quote, this is their words, not mine. It is wrong for Mormons to portray Joseph Smith's last moment of that as an innocent lamb and a willing martyr. Absolutely so. Okay, again, their words. Now, after that shooting, the church divides into two groups. Okay, and we'll get into this, Lord willing, later. One led by his widow went back to Independence, Missouri. They're known as the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ. And again, we'll get into this later. All right. And they claim to be the true church, the true Mormons, right? They lay claim to legal succession of the church presidency, which was bestowed upon Joseph's son by Joseph Smith himself. The other group, and this is what we're more familiar with, the other group, right, because after he died, there's a big splint off. The other group was led by Brigham Young. They went to Utah, where in 1847 they ended up in Salt Lake and founded, of course, Salt Lake City. And, of course, Brigham Young had 25 wives and accumulated much wealth and was into slavery and all kinds of other stuff, okay? But before we get back to that, okay, I want to lead to you something that I left out, and that's where we're at this point. Smith's last words right before they shot him, okay? Not only is the whole thing's a bunch of contradictions, that's a kind word, lies, and even their own history of how their own leader not just came up with this story, okay, is a lie, but how he died and how they portray him is a lie, okay? But he did something right before he died, and this helps to explain some of the things in Mormonism, okay? He did this, quote, his last words were, "Oh Lord, my God." Well, he must have been a Christian right there. No, that's actually the first part of a phrase that he was trying to get out. Again, he wasn't a lamb led to slaughter. He was trying to escape even at the very end. Listen to this. And this is by a Mormon historian. So this is in their own camp reporting this fact. A guy named Reed Durham. Not to be confused with Reed Rucker right there in the front row. Reed Durham, okay. And I'll even give it to you. On page 28 of the booklet called No Help for the Widow's Son.
Okay. Hold on. Hello? Okay, you can hear me. Hold on. 1 second. 1 second. Let me just answer a text. Hold on. Okay. So we are on chapter 4, the Book of Lehi, a primer in American Jewish restoration. Okay, give me 1 second. Okay. Introduction. The aim of this chapter is to reconstruct select narratives, elements of the Lost Book of Lehi, and to show how these lent themselves to an American proto-Zionist understanding of the book's message and purpose, and even implicitly model a proto-Zionist program the early Mormons could undertake. The first part of this chapter will introduce the proto-exilic setting in which the Book of Lehi opens and show how the setting ideally frames an American proto-Zionist message. The second part of this chapter will build on chapter 1 in further describing the methodology of reconstruction. The third part, comprising the body of the chapter, will be actual work of reconstruction and relate the results of the proto-Zionist interpretation of the book originally held by Joseph Smith and Martin Harris. In our previous chapter, we saw that early Mormons interpreted the purpose of their nascent movement and its founding scripture, the Book of Lehi, as that of gathering the Jews to a new Jerusalem in the United States. In the work of reconstructing elements of the Book of Lehi in this chapter, I hope to illuminate a major reason why the early Mormons understood their movement as one that would gather the Jews to an American Zion, namely, the earliest Mormons interpreted their movement in such an American proto-Zionist terms because the Book of Lehi's opening narrative epitomized the problem of exile and typified an American proto-Zionist solution to that problem. In recounting the story of how an ancient band of Jews found refuge from the travels of the exile in an American promised land, the book explicitly modeled how latter-day Jews might do the same. The narrative of Lehi and Nephi, given in the Book of Lehi, Book of Mormon, opens at the beginning of the biblical exile and deals extensively with the themes of exile, the loss of sacred land and institutions, and the restoration, recovery, or replacement of sacred land and institutions. That the Lehi narrative, and thus the entire Book of Mormon narrative, opens with the inauguration of the exile appears to have hitherto escaped scholarly notice. Grind. Can you grind it in the bedroom? Okay. But it is evident in the extant text and is a key to reconstructing the Book of Lehi's narratives and understands why its adherents interpreted the book in proto-Zionist terms. The narrative of the Book of Mormon's initial, later lost manuscript begins with that of the Hebrew Bible, recapitulating the saga of the biblical Israel and extending it into the New World. Its foundational narratives of Lehi's family fleeing Jerusalem and of Nephi establishing a kingdom and a new Jerusalem introduces the Hebraic themes of covenant, promised land, exile, and restoration that pervade both the book and the faith that emerged from it. These accounts comprise the narrative bedrock of the Book of Mormon and a scriptural foundation for Mormonism. However, important elements of these narratives are missing from the extant text, leaving holes in contemporary understanding of the book and the early Mormon ideal of restoration. This chapter will reconstruct missing narrative elements. Hold on 1 second. Just checking something. Hold on. As we will see in reconstructing these missing pieces, the story of Lehi and his son Nephi, particularly as it was told in the first part of the Book of Lehi, was a story of Jewish exile and restoration of exile from the biblical promised land and of restoration in a new American promised land. Extant evidence indicates that the Book of Lehi's Nephite saga recapitulated major narratives of the biblical Israel, for example, the Exodus, the building of the tabernacle, the conquest, and the establishment of a divinely appointed dynasty, and described the systematic replacement of the biblical institutions of the Commonwealth of Judah, for example, Sacred City Tabernacle, Ark of the Covenant, Temple, Sacral Dynasty, with the parallel institutions of a Nephite Commonwealth of Joseph. We will begin our work of reconstruction looking at the narrative of Lehi and Nephi. We will first reconstruct an element of Lehi's story from the Book of Lehi that is absent from but consistent with the extant text echoes extant texts, echoes the story of biblical Israel, and establishes institutions parallel to those of the pre-exilic Commonwealth of Judah. In this narrative, part of Lehi's Exodus, Lehi constructs a tabernacle parallel to the tabernacle of the Exodus to provisionally replace the Jerusalem temple he and his family had lost. We will reconstruct this information about Lehi's tabernacle using both Fayette Lapalme's report of his 1830 interview with Joseph Smith's father, Joseph Smith Sr., and internal evidence from the extant text. We will next review the brief extant narrative regarding Nephi's temple, reconstructing further details that help flesh out that narrative and show the extent to which the temple of Nephi was modeled on the Temple of Solomon. After reconstructing lost details of the Book of Lehi opening narratives, we will turn our attention to some of the Book of Lehi's closing narratives, those of King Messiah, as discussed below. One of the narrative scholars have recognized as missing from the extant Book of Mormon text is the narrative of the Nephite recovery of the Jaredite interpreters as counterpart instruments to the biblical high priest. Urim and Thummim described has been sealed up with the sealed plates of the brother of Jared. Returning the Fayette Lapalme narrative, we will find just such a story provided there. We will assess that narrative using clues from the extant text. We will also review the story of Messiah joining his people with the people of Zarahemla and discussing how this story's more complete lost versions likely differ from the present text. After exploring these stories from the lost manuscript, we will assess how they collectively evoke the idea of gathering Jews and Indians to an American New Jerusalem and provided a ready-made pattern for such a program of gathering. Hold on. Hold on. Proto-exilic setting, Lehi's Jerusalem, and the problem of exile. It is understandable that the early Mormons would have thought their new sacred world would gather the Jews in from the long exile because of the book in the ways that have been appreciated. It's about exile and restoration. The problem of exile was particularly central, as I will argue below, in a detailed lost version of the narrative of Lehi and Nephi, but it is also prominent in the extant version. Hold on. The Book of Mormon introduces the problem of exile up front in its replacement for the Book of Lehi as a primary problem to be solved. Lehi's prophetic call and flight for Jerusalem are presented as near simultaneous with the exile's first wave. The book thus uses the inaugural event of the exile to frame the narrative of Lehi and Nephi. Lehi's story begins in Jerusalem with the biblical narrative of both Jeremiah, who prophesied the exile of the Jews, and Zedekiah, the ill-fated and terminal monarch of David's dynasty. Lehi experienced a theophany and prophetic call in the first year of Zedekiah's reign. The new prophet promptly joins the Jeremiads to those of Jeremiah, warning Jerusalem's citizens of their pending captivity and their city's destruction. Not surprisingly, borrowing another page from Jeremiah, he soon finds his message rejected and his life threatened. Yet it is not in the footsteps of the weeping prophet that Lehi will ultimately follow, but in those of the wilderness wandering Moses. Being warned by God that Judea was soon to become to a land of captivity, as Egypt had been for his forebears, Lehi and his family flee to the wilderness for freedom and safety. Lehi's exile was approximately timed. The familiar account of Lehi's initial calling and warning theophany in the opening verses of the extant Book of Mormon text places these events in the commencement of the first year of the reign of Zedekiah. This phrase's familiarity of Book of Mormon readers obscure its significance. When was the commencement of the first year of this reign of Zedekiah, and how exactly was his reign commenced? In the biblical narrative, Zedekiah's reign begins during an invasion of Jerusalem by the forces of Babylonian Emperor Nebuchadnezzar II. Jerusalem reportedly fell to Babylon's siege in Adar, the 12th month in the Jewish calendar. Jehoiachin was apparently dethroned and replaced by the Babylonians at the approximate end of the calendar year. The chroniclers state when the year was expired, King Nebuchadnezzar sent and brought him, Jehoiachin, to Babylon with the goodly vessels of the house of the Lord, and made Zedekiah his brother king over Judah and Jerusalem. Biblical quotations herein are from the English version that was authoritative in Joseph Smith's time and is echoed in the language of the Latter-day Saints scripture, the King James Version. The inauguration of the first book of Zedekiah's reign was therefore timed to coincide with the ringing of the new calendar year with the month of Nisan. And at this time, Nebuchadnezzar not only replaced Jehoiachin with Zedekiah, he also effected the first wave of Babylonian exile. He carried away all of Jerusalem and all the princes and all the mighty men of valor, even 10,000 captives, and all the craftsmen and smiths. None remained save the poorest sort of people of the land. And he carried away Jehoiachin to Babylon, and the king's mother and the king's wives, and his officer, and the mighty of the land, those carried into captivity from Jerusalem to Babylon. And all the men of might, even 7,000, and craftsmen and smiths and thousands, all that were strong and apt for war, even them the king of Babylon brought captive to Babylon. Zedekiah's coronation was concurrent with the beginning of the exile. How does the Book of Mormon position Lehi's warning and prophetic call relative to these events? The significance of the phase in the commencement of the nth year in a Book of Mormon context can be gleaned from its use elsewhere in the book. I'm almost ready. There is one instance in Alam 561 where the phase is used in conjunction with an exact calendar date, enabling us to discern how literally it is to be taken. When that passage narrows the commencement of the year to a specific date, the date is the second day in the first month, for example, the second day of the year. This is indeed the commencement of the year, suggesting that the phase is meant to be taken quite literally. When the narrative places Lehi's calling/warning vision in the commencement of Zedekiah's first year of reign, this should be taken at face value, placing Lehi's vision at or near the opening of the calendar year. The primary purpose of the chronological indicator in the narratives of Lehi's calling is to place that event relative to the biblical chronology. If Lehi's calling narrative opens near the beginning of Zedekiah's first regional year, then the calling event is meant to be understood in a certain relationship to the biblical event we have been describing. Namely, it is meant to be understood as essentially simultaneous with, in the immediate wake of, or even during the Babylonian invasion that commenced Zedekiah's reign. The invasion that removes Jehoiachin installed Zedekiah and inaugurated the first wave of the Babylonian exile. The Book of Mormon chronology thus places Lehi's vision concurrent with major events that fracture Jewish polity and religious practice. The invasion of Nebuchadnezzar II's armies that had deposed Jehoiachin and installed Zedekiah also stripped the temple of its treasures, leaving worshippers without their literal touchstones with deity. The divinely inspired tablets of the Ark of the Covenant and the Urim and Thummim, by which the high priests received revelations. Nebuchadnezzar's armies carried Jehoiachin and many of Jerusalem's notables to Babylon with them in bondage, a small beginning to the vast Babylonian exile. Lehi and family abandoned Jerusalem in anticipation of the Babylonian emperor's final invasion and the world-shattering change it would bring for the Jews and Judaism. The destruction of the first temple, the abolition of the Davidic monarchy by the capture of Zedekiah and the execution of his sons, and the exile of much of the population to Babylon. The generations of Jews after Babylonian captivity inherited the fractured world of the diaspora, never restoring the pristine wholeness of living in a single body, ruled by a scion of the house of David, and worshiping in a temple that housed the ark and its sacred memorials of the Exodus. Okay, let's get back to this.
Said that here's how he died, right? It was, oh, I'm just sitting there trying to tell. No, he died like this. He had his hands up like this, forming this specific hand gesture. We'll get to that in a second. And what he was trying to say was the complete phrase, "Oh Lord my God," okay? And then what he was trying to say was the finishing that say, is there no help for the widow's son? Now, why was he saying that? Because that is a Masonic distress signal. You have to have, guys have done this in court when they're going before court with the judge. If the judge is a Masonic judge, all he's got to do is give some secret hand signal. But he specifically, you say the phrase, oh Lord my God, is there not any help for the widow's son or whatever? Okay, that's the signal that these other guys, if they were Freemasons, they are under a blood oath that they have to spare that guy's life, i.e. Joseph Smith, right? So that's, and you're going like, well, what are the odds that those other guys were Masons? We'll see in just a second. At this time, early on in just Nauvoo, there's up to about 1,500 just men were Masons. And we'll see why in just a second. So once again, he's not a lamb led to the slaughter. He's given the Masonic sign to hopefully these guys, but he didn't get to finish the sentence. They shot him. Interesting. So not only a lamb led to slaughter is a bunch of baloney, but that's the next question. Okay, so Joseph Smith, was he a martyr? What's the answer? Rhymes with no. Okay, for those of you wondering. Okay, number 2, was he really involved in Freemasonry? Wow. Now, yes, he is going to be the answer. I'll just tell you right now. Now, we don't have time to go into a knockdown, drag out of Freemasonry. I'm just going to give you just a little smattering. We have a whole, I think it's the very last chapter in our book is all going to be on Freemasonry. But just to give you an idea of Freemasonry, number 1, so you understand what he was involved in, and then we're going to get into the parallels because he not only was a liar, story, but he's a plagiarist. And he rips off things from contemporary history to make up this thing called the Book of Mormon. And we're going to see tonight, Lord willing, that he also ripped off the rituals in Freemasonry, and he didn't even come up with those. The guy, with all due respect, I don't know how else to describe. He's a con artist, right? But anyway, so Freemasonry. Now again, we're going to get into this much later. Start date 5,322. Bobby turns 97. Yeah, big guy. So hope I'm still keeping. But anyway, Freemasonry. This is what they believe. Now, by the way, Freemasonry. I'll just be blunt. This is nothing that any Christian, anybody, should ever be involved in. Certainly not a Christian. This is one of the most anti-Christian, unchristian, I don't know, unbiblical. Throw as many uns as you can at this thing. And I'll just state this on record, on tape. If you are a Christian and you were involved in this, you need to repent. You need to get right with God, and you need to immediately leave right now. This is demonic, and this is not Christian. All right, so let me just give you a little teaser on that aspect. Freemasonry, also known as like Eastern Star, if you're familiar with that. Also, they have their own youth groups. Did you know that? The guy's youth group is called Team Malay, named after a Knights Templar guy. Okay. Also, they have a youth group for girls, and it's either called Rainbow Girls or Job's Daughters. Okay. And I could tell you stories of being a former youth pastor way back in the day, last week. That was a church that was mega into Freemasonry, and their youth group was Team Malay and Job's Daughters in the church. Right? I've dealt with people in the church, deacons, board members involved in the local Freemasonry lodge, controlling what was going on in the church, and also restricting what was to be taught at that church. I had one guy I was teaching, because basically what we're going to see, Freemasonry, basically come one, come all, right? Christianity is not exclusive. Jesus is not exclusive. You know, you just got to believe in a supreme being, but you can fill in the blank. Right? So the last thing you want to do is start saying that Jesus is the only way. Well, I'm preaching a sermon, Jesus is the only way. So this guy, I didn't know at the time. Later I found out he was a Mason in the town. And this is in the church leadership. Right? And he comes up to me after that sermon, and he looks at me, big old guy. Of course, everybody's big compared to vertically challenged people like myself. But this is a big guy, like 6'6", big. His hand could eat my head. Right? So he comes up to me, and he looks down. And he just gets in my face and he says, I don't want to hear that preaching no more. We shouldn't be talking about other religions. Because I was doing a comparison. Here's Christianity, but here's a little bit of Mormonism. Here's what the Muslims and Jehovah's Witnesses, just doing how they're radically different. The exclusivity of the exclusive. The gospel is exclusive, right? And compared to nothing in great detail like we're doing now, right? But that was enough to get them riled up. And so basically, I went and did a visit after that. And because his wife said, "Oh, you want to talk to him? He's going to upset." What? So we'll talk to him. So we're going round and round and round. I'm basically, listen, how am I supposed to be a loving person if I can't tell people that their way is the wrong way, which means they're going to hell? And then if I can't say nothing, then how's that being a loving person? Couldn't answer whatever. But basically, you know how the conversation ended? Looked me straight in the face like this and said, "I've seen a lot of you come, preachers. I've seen a lot of you preachers come, and a lot of you go." It was a threat right in my face. So what did I do next week? Kept preaching on it. And I'm not saying that to boast. It's like, you can't back down. But this is in the church. So we'll have probably, the Lord willing, more stories once we get to that. But Freemasonry is not the same thing as Christianity. Get out. Just get out, run. Don't make apologies. Get out now. You do not want to align yourself with it. But basically, Eastern Star Freemasonry, Team LA, Job's Daughters, Rainbow Girls, etc., the same thing. All you got to do is believe in the existence of a supreme being, which includes the gods of Islam, Hinduism, any other world religion. Basically, it's unbiblical. It's anti-Christian beliefs. Okay, it has the outward appearance of just being a good old boys club, good for business, especially. Same thing with Mormons, right? You want to get a job, you want to get some furniture, you want to get a promotion, you want the same thing. Which, again, when you understand the ties of the Freemasonry, they're doing the same tactics. Okay, is that? But basically, the very process of joining Freemasonry's lodge requires Christians to ignore, again, the exclusivity of Jesus Christ as the Lord and Savior. So, in fact, they even say you shouldn't even mention his name. But if you're a Christian and you're in this, how could you submit to that? If you can't even mention the name of Jesus Christ. If you certainly can't say he's the only way to heaven, why would you want to be a part of that? Red flag, run, right? And we're just getting started, okay? They also believe that a person will be saved and go to heaven as a result of his good works and personal self-improvement. So, hello, workspace. Why are you part of this? This is Freemasonry. They believe that the Bible is just one of many sacred books, or the volumes of sacred law, they would say. And it's an important book, but only for those who claim to be Christians are concerned. Just like the Quran would be important to a Muslim who decides to become a Freemason, etc. Blah, blah, blah. There's nothing exclusive about the Bible. The Bible says there's one God, but Masons say that basically they invite people of all faiths, even if they use different names for, quote, the nameless one of 100 names. No, there's only one God, right? But again, this is the basic belief. Masons view that there is no doctrine to the deity of Jesus Christ. They deny that. It's also deemed to be un-Masonic to invoke the name of Jesus when praying and even mention his name in the lodge. Okay? Suggesting that Jesus is the only way to God in the Freemasonry lodge contradicts their principle of tolerance. Right? So basically, in a nutshell, all religions come together, just be under the umbrella of Freemasonry. Kind of reminds you of Catholicism, doesn't it? What we just finished up before. But again, Jesus is just another religious leader. Masons teach that man is not sinful, just, quote, rude and imperfect. Must have been driving in Vegas in the traffic when they come up with that doctrine. So I'm going to go, excuse me, right? Human beings, they say, are able to improve their character in various ways: charity, moral living, voluntary performance of civic duty. That's, again, why they're big on works, helping in the community. That's their version of salvation, just like the Mormons, right? Doing good works, riding on the bike and doing all the stuff. And it's the same thing, right? Also, when a Christian, so-called Christian, takes the oath of Freemasonry, he is swearing to the following doctrines that God has pronounced false and sinful. So if you're a Christian, you say you're a Christian, and you join Freemasonry, this is what you have to agree by. Number one, that salvation can be gained by man's good works. Right there, you should have ran for the door. Number two, that Jesus is just one of many equally revered prophets. Flee to the door. Right? Number three, that you as a supposed Christian, quote, will remain silent in the lodge and not talk of Christ. Run. Which also, once again, for those of you who weren't here last time, is very similar to the acronym for the Mormon Church, LDS, the Crone translation, leave, don't stop. Okay, do the same thing with Freemasonry. Get out of there, man. This is not a joke. Run. How in the world? I don't care if it's good for business. Change jobs. Get out of there. This is satanic. It's unbiblical. It's a cult, right? But anyway, so that's basically, and again, we'll get into that in much greater detail. But that's what Joseph Smith was involved in. That's why he was given this specific hand gesture, forming the square, right, with your hands up here, trying to say the phrase, but he only got half of it out, right? So that's why he was doing it. He was a Freemason, and that's easily documented. In fact, not just him, but his brother Hiram and his dad, his family was Freemasons, okay? And that's easily documented as well. By the 1840s, Smith and several prominent members of the Latter-day Saints had become Freemasons and founded a lodge in Nauvoo, Illinois, in March 1842. Soon after joining Freemasonry, Smith introduced a temple endowment ceremony. Now, this is their big temple that we're going to see in the temples that, you know, only the ones who, on the priesthood, you got to go on your bike ride tour, you got to have a referral, you got to pay up your cash, 30%, right? And they're going to pull your W-2s if you don't pay up. So you got to go through all that. And then all of a sudden, he goes through the Freemasonry rituals, which we're going to see is almost carbon copy. And just a matter, I kid you not, of weeks of him becoming a Mason, going through those rituals, guess what he comes out with? His own ritual, but he doesn't call it Freemasonry. It's called the Temple Endowment Ceremony. You liar. You ripped it off from Freemasonry. We'll get into that in just a second, okay? And anyway, and so he remained a Freemason unto his death. And again, that's what he was trying to do, to save his skin, not be a martyr, to the very end. Now, other significant leaders were also Masons, including Brigham Young, who I believe even wore his Freemason pin the rest of his life. Okay, so he was a Freemason. Heber Kimball and John C. Bennett. Listen, also among the Mormons, soon over 1,500 Mormon men in the city of Nauvoo, which obviously was a small town, were practicing Masons. So he had a pretty good odds if he could have got the whole rest of the thing out. They might have spared his life because they have to take a blood oath, because that's a Mason brother. Even if he's guilty, I don't care what he's done, we cannot kill him. But he didn't get it out. And in fact, he wasn't just a Mason. 1842, Smith became a Master Mason. He was also raised to the third degree of Master Mason on site by Grand Master Jones of the Grand Lodge of Illinois. Joseph Smith's family was a Masonic family. They practiced the tenets of Freemasonry. His father, his brother. In fact, it's documented that his father was raised to the degree of Master Mason on May 7th, 1818 in the Ontario Lodge, number 23 of Canandaigua, New York. His brother Hiram was a member of the Mount Moriah Lodge, number 112 in Palmyra, New York, where they grew up. The LDS Church temple worship shares all kinds of similarities to Freemasonry. And we're going to get to this in great detail in just a second. I mean everything, from what they're doing with the secret handshakes to the symbols that they have displayed inside, outside, all over. It's just the guy literally ripped them off from Freemasonry. Okay. In fact, listen to this: Masons exchange secret handshakes. Right? There's certain ways you got to do with your thumb and all this other stuff, and again, we'll get into that later. To identify other Freemasons, again in public, or in times of distress, like he was trying to do, and things of that nature. Well, Mormonism teaches these handshakes. They got their own secret handshakes, but guess where they got them from? But all he did, he took the same term, and he just changed the terminology, right? Joseph Smith said that you have to give these secret handshakes and these temple things, right? And I believe some of it's like behind, you got to do with your hand behind the curtain and all, whatever. Anyway, but these are given not to identify a fellow Freemason, but they're given to sentinel angels so that Mormons may be admitted into the highest kingdom of heaven. Okay, because again, they got 3 tiers, right? And it depends on your work. So if you want to make it all the way to the top, you got to really work at it. And that literally is what it is, the celestial kingdom at the top, where you get to eventually become, you don't want to be on that lower level. You want to be on the 3rd level, that top level. Because you do that, hey, according to their teaching, that's right, you get to become a god. Your wife gets to become a goddess if you call her secret name out on Resurrection Day. And I don't think they didn't hold that over their head. They do still to this day. But also then you get to forever populate your own planet with spirit babies. Yeah, my wife doesn't want to do that either. But 2 kids for enough. But anyway, let's move on. LDS temple garments, right? Temple garments, again, I'm telling you, let's just get into this to where you got the parallel going on. It just, he ripped it off. Now, believe it or not, everything I'm going to say to you right now is Freemasonry, but it's also all over the place with Mormons. And I'm telling you, the guy just ripped the whole thing off. Okay? Joseph Smith, the all-seeing eye. huge with Freemasonry. Again, we'll get into this in much greater detail later. But right now, to this day, on the top of the towers of the Salt Lake Temple is the all-seeing eye. Still in the temple. Freemasonry, Mormonists also have with the apron, the beehive. We'll get to this in just a second. Beehive is a big thing with Freemasons. It's supposed to be an icon of industry and stuff. Big in also Mormonism as well. The square and the compass, the emblem of clasped hands, the 5 points of fellowship. Wait till you hear who also has a 5 points of fellowship. And that's basically this. It's this little ritual that you go through. The Masons have it, okay? But it's basically you got foot to foot, then you go knee to knee, then you go hand to hand, then you have breast to breast, and then you have the left hand behind the back, or some of the mouth. There's a variant that's there. So basically, they both just, and I'm telling you, tit for tat, what are the odds of him? He's supposed to have this new vision that's supposed to be better than anything else, and then you're going down right down the line, carbon copy everything that Freemasonry has, even their symbolism, even their rituals, even their verbiage, even their secret handshakes. It just, there's no way it's by chance. Special garments, garment markings as well. In fact, let's get into that, the endowment ceremony, right? Now, the endowment ceremony, they do this as they're working their way to the priesthood because they want to make it to the maximum level, right? The celestial kingdom. And believe it or not, we got actual recordings. People have recorded what's going on there, right? And let me give you just a little transcript of this. And this is the practice of the endowment ceremony, right? That basically Joseph Smith, he went through a ceremony of Freemasonry, and then all of a sudden, weeks later, hey, he's got his own. So this is the ceremony. Brethren and sisters, you are here to receive your own endowments. Should you have been washed, anointed, and clothed in the garment of the holy priesthood, and also for those who are representing deceased persons, because they go through this ritual also for the dead. We'll get into that later. Why is baptizing the dead? Why are the Mormons so big on genealogy? Why are they so big on the dead? Why is that a big doctrine in the Mormon church? We'll get into that great later. And believe it or not, it has to do partly with Joseph Smith's brother. And but anyway, we'll get into that later. But they also, at the same time, not only you got to go through this washing ritual, you not only have to wear these garments, which I'll get into in a second, during this secret ceremony. It's supposed to be secret, but you're also being given a new name, a new special name, right? And you have this garment, they say, placed upon you, but the realizing of these blessings, quote, depends on your faithfulness, right? So again, it's all works-based, whatever. It's there. So there they are. They're going through this ceremony, and I'm going through it kind of fast. I'm just giving you a little nutshell because I'm trying to draw that parallel. Basically, you're in this ritual. This is it. This is the top thing, man. You're making it to the highest level. You're working your way up, just like in Freemasonry. You work your way up, okay? But you got your garment. You've been washed, cleansed, supposedly. You got your garment on. You also got this new name. Now, they say, quote, you've had a new name given to you, which you were told never to divulge and never forget. And this new name is the key word by which you will be required to give at a certain place in the temple today. But also, they're going to need it for later. So the big thing is you got the garments on, you've been washed, been cleansed, you're going through this ritual. It's a works-based salvation. You're trying to work your way to the top level, okay, and you get this new name. Now, that's a lot. First of all, works-based salvation, that's a nightmare. How do you know it's enough? What if you did 100,000 good things and you get there, so to speak, and it's 100,001? Oops. You never know. It's a nightmare. And plus, you got to remember this new name. Oh, by the way, these supposed new names, these secret names that they give these people, Mormons who've come out and have gone through this temple service. Okay, one report, the guy says, actually, it's about 12 names and they just recycle them. But see, the orders are, you can't tell anybody. So nobody knows. So whatever. But anyway, so new names. Now that's just, you can't ever forget this new name, right? Hope it's got a good jingle, because have you guys noticed that the older you get, you forget stuff. I mean, they're eternal destiny. You better not. In fact, let me give you a couple of examples real quick. I got to take this little detail. Don't forget. This elderly guy, he's talking with a friend. He says, my wife and I, we tried a new Chinese restaurant the other night, and it was really good. I think you and your wife would really enjoy it. And so his friend said, really? Hey, we'll have to try it. What's the name of the restaurant? And And the guy goes, let's see, what was the name? I can't.
Okay. Hold on. Okay, hello? Okay. We're gonna come back to this. Okay, so I'm gonna read and we'll come back to this and finish this. And then I don't know if I'll keep going or not. Okay. Lehi's band escaped from this forced exile to Babylon only by undertaking voluntary exile in the wilderness. Other than the loss of liberty, Lehi's group endures the losses that characterize the exile, with the additional loss of the biblical high priest and the entire Aaronite priestly class. The exiles in the book of Lehi and the small plates of Nephi narrative, no less than those in the biblical narrative, are dispossessed of their inherited land, the temple, the divine presence embodied in the sacred relics and enshrined in the Ark of the Covenant, and sacral rule provided by the dynastic Davidic dynasty. They become, in the word of Lehi and Sariah's wilderness-born son Jacob, wanderers cast out from Jerusalem. Thus, although Lehi's prophetic career begins several years before Nebuchadnezzar II's destruction of Jerusalem and mass deportation of its people, the setting for this prophetic career is not pre-exilic but proto-exilic. Lehi's calling occurs contemporaneous with the first wave of the exile. The story of his prophetic career opens with exile, and much of its early action is motivated by the problem of exile, that of coping with the loss of sacred places, institutions, and relics of the Jewish Commonwealth. Notably, in the Lehi story, the New World is the Jews' original place of refuge from the travails of the exile. No sooner had the first wave of the exile begun than Jews from Jerusalem set out for an American promised land. Yet, despite the fact of their exile from the land of Abraham, the Book of Mormon's narrators almost never express a sense of exile, of being strangers in a strange land. Jacob stands alone among them in his longing for the Jerusalem he had never seen. This is perhaps because although the Book of Lehi / Book of Mormon are represented as suffering the same loss of religious and political center as the biblical exile to Babylon, their framing of the loss and their response differ dramatically. Rather than framing his journey as an exile from the promised land of his ancestors, Nephi frames it as an exodus to the new promised land provided for his descendants, and thus the birth of a new Jewish nation. Nephi preserves his people's Israelite identity outside Eretz Israel by establishing religious and political institutions like those he knew in his youth in the pre-exilic Israelite Commonwealth. Despite the Commonwealth's destruction and his people's exile, they were not long bereft of sacred city, temples, relics, embodying God's presence, instruments of revelation, and divinely chosen king. Taking Lehi for their Moses, they had journeyed to a new promised land. There, under Nephi's reign, they built a new Jerusalem, and at its heart a sanctuary like unto the Temple of Solomon, in which they housed the memorials of their exodus and continued their sacrifices. Many of the clues of the book of Lehi's contents cluster around this central theme of founding a new nation of Israel and restoring what had been lost through exile. The book of Lehi delineated even more clearly than the extant account how Lehi and Nephi echo the major figures and events of the founding of Israel. Among the elements of the book of Lehi narratives that can be inferred from the extant Book of Mormon text and or identified in 19th century sources are Lehi's covenant with God for a promised land, Lehi's deathbed blessing on his children, dividing them as Jacob divided his children into discrete tribes, echoes of the Israelites' struggle with Egypt with the Egyptians, and the native of Lehi's exodus, an account of Lehi's structuring a tabernacle modeled on Moses' tabernacle, narratives of Nephite settlement of the new promised land modeled on biblical conquest, Nephi's construction of a Solomonic temple, mentions of a Nephite equivalent to the biblical Ark of the Covenant, and echoes of the founding of David's dynasty and the founding of the Nephi dynasty. Unifying themes of these narratives is that of the establishment of a new Israelite nation modeled on the establishment of the biblical Israelite nation. To fully lay this out will require an entire book. In this chapter, we will reconstruct just a couple of those elements of the Lehi and Nephi narrative, namely Lehi's construction of the tabernacle, echoing that of Moses, and Nephi's construction of a temple modeled on that of Solomon. We will also reconstruct a few elements of the narrative of the later king Messiah. Those narratives, again, reiterate the patterns of dispossession from one sacred land and exodus to another. The elements of the Book of Lehi's narrative the element of the Book of Lehi narrative reconstructed in this chapter thus have an underlying theme: exile followed by restoration in a new land. The Book of Lehi accounts of Lehi and Nephi portrayed them encountering the Book of Lehi's account of Lehi and Nephi portrayed them countering their loss of their Jewish commonwealth in the Old World by constructing a smaller but structurally parallel commonwealth in the New World. Lehi and Nephi recreated in microcosm the Israel they left behind. Similarly, Mosiah counters the loss of Lehi and Nephi's sacred land, the land of Nephi or the land of Lehi Nephi, and its institutions by building parallel institutions in yet another sacred land, the land of Zarahemla. The stories of Lehi and Nephi and of Mosiah thus recapitulate the biblical story of Israel's founding as a people and a kingdom. Working assumptions and methodology of reconstruction. As noted in the introductory chapter, this thesis does not assume that the Book of Mormon is historical. It also does not assume that the Book of Mormon is ahistorical. Rather than using scholarship to adjudicate the Latter-day Saint faith claim, the Latter-day Saint faith claim, in this work I approach the Book of Mormon, including the Book of Lehi, on its own terms as a coherent narrative world. As Wolfgang Iser, one of the founders of the reader response theory, argued, the response of reading or interpreting a text assumes that the text has a fundamental coherence and seeks to find that coherence. In the case of the Book of Mormon, the premise of high degree of coherence seems warranted by its fruitfulness. Literary analysis of the Book of Mormon including Grant Hardy's highly praised Understanding the Book of Mormon, a reader's guide published by Oxford University Press, and more recently, John Christopher Thomas's A Pentecostal Reads the Book of Mormon, have profitably approached the Book of Mormon as a coherent narrative populated by self-consistent characters and narrated by personae who demonstrate distinctive motifs and voices. Building on the success of Hardy's methodology, I take the character and narrators of the Book of Mormon to be self-consistent and comprehensible, and per Iser, seek the most coherent reading of the Book of Mormon narrative. One reason this needs to be spelled out strictly is that readers unfamiliar with this methodology might confuse the assumption of coherence with the assumption of historicity. Here's the distinction. For my purpose here, it matters how the narrative in the Book of Mormon relates to one another. Here is the distinction. For my purpose here, it matters how the narrative in the Book of Mormon relate to one another, to their implicit backstories, and to the biblical narrative that serve as their backdrop. Having said that, for my present purposes, it does not matter how Book of Mormon narrative relate to the actual events in 6th century BCE Jerusalem, insofar as they may have differed from the account viable in the Bible, nor to incidents of ancient Native American history recoverable by archaeologists. What is assumed here is not the Book of Mormon's historicity, but its narrativity. My methodology of reconstructing assumes the Book of Mormon's narrative, like narratives generally, is largely coherent with itself, its implicit backstory, and with the prominent narratives it explicitly identifies as its backdrop, in this case, the biblical narrative. My methodology does not assume that the Book of Mormon is perfectly coherent with itself or this background, only that it is largely so. My methodology also does not assume that the Book of Mormon is necessarily coherent with the world beyond its own narrative and that of the Bible, nor is such a larger coherence relevance to reconstructing the book's missing narrative. Another point raising in chapter 1, but bearing reiteration and further elucidation here, is the relationship of the Book of Lehi to the Book of Mormon. The Book of Lehi is properly the initial portion of the Book of Mormon. It shares the same narrator as the extant Book of Mormon text, Mormon, and consists of the first 4.5 centuries of a narration that the extant text then takes on in the Book of Mosiah and carries through to the destruction of the Nephite nation. The term Book of Mormon narrative thus includes the Book of Lehi. That said, That said, in my text, I will often draw distinctions between the Book of Lehi and the extant Book of Mormon. I do this because evidence such as I discussed in the previous chapter suggests that the Book of Lehi had emphasis distinct from those of the extant Book of Mormon text, such as in the particular emphasis on Hebraic themes. While such themes run through the Book of Mormon, the statements of John H. Gilbert and Hezekiah McCoon and further evidence should be presented below suggests that such themes were more pronounced in the Book of Lehi. While the Book of Lehi should not be any means by thought of an autonomous work independent of the Book of Mormon, it is fruitfully approached as a thematically distinct subset of this larger work. Granting the premise of substantial internal coherence in the Book of Mormon's narrative world, which seems both necessary to analyzing its narratives and warranted by previous analysis, the extant Book of Mormon narrative provides clues by which we can infer elements of non-extant narratives. Most straightforwardly, we can assume that structural elements of the narrative were substantially the same. So, for instance, given the extant Book of Mormon narrative begins in Jerusalem and describes a group of Jews, we can safely assume that the Lost Book of Mormon narrative also begins with Jerusalem Jews and not, say, Han Dynasty Chinese soldiers. More specifically, and less facetiously, we can safely assume that essential elements driving the plot of the extant Lehi and Nephi narratives, such as Lehi's calling vision and warning of Jerusalem's impending destruction, Lehi's exodus, Nephi's beheading of Laban to obtain the brass plates, and the rebellion and ultimate curse of Nephi's brother Laman and Lemuel, and the like, appeared in substantially similar form in the non-extant text. The extant narrative thus provides our first source of evidence for the content of the non-extant narrative. Essential plot indicates in the extant narrative would be found also in the Book of Lehi narrative. Even non-essential elements in the extant text can be assumed to be consistent with the Book of Lehi, since the two exist in the same narrative world, enabling us to use the extant narrative to make inference about the missing narrative. Comparison of this method with Iser's reader response theory is again illuminating. According to Iser, one of the more significant acts a reader does is make creative inferences as gaps or blanks in a text such that narrative coherence is created or restored. The gaps and blanks of which Iser speaks are intentional compositional voids in the story rather than places where the text has been inadvertently lost. Yet the use of inference to create a narrative coherence across gaps is a common feature shared by the general act of reading. As Iser describes it, and the method employed herein of reconstructing the lost Book of Lehi narrative using the extant narrative. What I will be doing in my reconstructive inference in an extension is an extension of this strategies used in ordinary reading. There are limits to our ability to infer Book of Lehi elements from the extant text. We encounter these limits in two ways. First, there will be many details of the Book of Lehi text that our data in the extant text is insufficient to infer. While we can infer some elements of the Book of Lehi narrative, it will not be possible to recover that narrative in most of its detail, and with occasional exceptions, with its exact wording. Second, the presumed consistency of the extant narrative with the missing narrative does not mean they incorporated all the same elements, and in some areas we have reason to believe that the Book of Lehi differed from the extant text, incorporating elements the extant text lacks or omitting elements the extant text contains. We have evidence from John H. Gilbert and Hezekiah McCoon, for instance, that the Book of Lehi was perceived by its earliest audience as an Old Testament-like project rather than a New Testament-like project. On this basis, we might question whether some of the more New Testament elements of the extant narrative, such as Nephi's vision of the early Christian church appeared in the book of Lehi. Unfortunately, we are given further clues to the distinctions between the extant text and the missing text in the extant text itself. The small plates of Nephi, the portion of the extant text that fills the chronological void left by the book of Lehi, carefully delimits the scope of its content and contrasts its content with that of other records. Specifically, this placement text distinguishes itself from what are supposed to be the sources behind the book of Lehi, Lehi's personal records, and Nephi's large plates. In drawing distinction between itself and the narratives that went into the book of Lehi, the small plates replacement text implicitly distinguishes the contents of the book of Lehi from those of the extant narrative. The extant small plates text characterizes itself as much richer in prophecy and doctrinal discourse than Lehi's record and Nephi's large plates, but much poorer in historical, for example, narrative and genealogical detail ministry. This differentiation suggests a limitation on how the extant small plates narrative can be used to infer the account of the book of Lehi. Prophecy and doctrinal discourse in the small plates text cannot be assumed to have appeared in the book of Lehi. Such differentiation serves a position function as well as a negative function, knowing that we should expect the book of Lehi to have a given richer genealogical and historical narration than the extant account means that narrative details absent from are merely implicit in the extant account can be assumed to have been absent from or merely implicit in the book of Lehi. Many narrative details that manifest only as implicit backstory in the extant account would likely have appeared as explicit story in the book of Lehi. Sorry, that was just hard to read. Okay, let me get back to this. Oh.
You think of what? Oh, hey, what's the name of a flower? It's real popular. It's long stemmed. It's got thorns. And the other guy goes, Rose. And the other guy, he says, yeah, that's it. Hey, Rose, what's the name of that restaurant that we ate at the other night? You know, and that happens to you when you get older, right? And one guy, this one, he said this. He was invited to a dinner by his elderly neighbors. And the old gentleman there, he endearingly preceded every request to his wife. Honey, darling, sweetheart, pumpkin, sweetie pie, all those pet names. And so the neighbor was impressed. And especially since the couple, they've been married about 70 years. Well, the wife, she goes off to the kitchen. So the neighbor guy, he asked this older gentleman, he says, man, I just think this is awesome. After all the years you've been married, you still refer to your wife in those terms. And the elderly guy just hung his head and he says, actually, I forgot her name about 10 years ago. But this is serious stuff, man. They give you a new name. You better not forget it. You work your way there. You don't know much. But anyway, so this is the temple. But let's get back on target. The garments. All right, let's get back to the garments. Freemasonry, Mormons, same thing. The garments, okay, they call them the garment of the holy priesthood. Right? You and I, this name on the street is magic underwear. Okay, now they don't like that term, but that's because it's supposed to have magical properties too, right? And it's a type of underwear worn by them, and they have it in this endowment ceremony, and they are told you got to wear this day and night for the rest of your life, right? Okay, and believe it or not, they say, when quotes, their words, not mine, when properly worn, this garment provides protection against temptation and evil. In fact, quote, tales are told of Latter-day Saints who credit their temple garments with helping them survive car wrecks, fires, and natural disasters. Hence why the average person, non-Mormon, would say, what is that, magic underwear? Okay, that's what it is, but that's what they believe. Now, the garment was first described in the 1840s. It's a one-piece undergarment extending originally from the ankles all the way up to the wrists. You're completely covered except for your head, basically, and feet and hands. Okay, it looked like they called them the Union suit. You know what that is? It's basically, remember the miners when they take their coveralls, they have that big old, they'd have those red pajamas on, right? They covered them basically the whole thing. Well, that was their first version of this secret garment they had to wear in this, men and women. They're basically, they also had an open crotch. They had a collar. It was unbleached cotton, was held together with ties and a double knot, and most of them are homemade. The original garment had 4 marks that were snipped into the cloth, as the part of the Nauvoo endowment ceremony. And the marks were the reverse L-shaped symbol on the right breast, the V-shaped symbol on the left breast, and horizontal marks on the navel and above the right knee. And later they became embroidered, but they left these, they put these specific markings on them. Okay, now, according to Mormon doctrine, these marks are special. And they're sacred symbols, right? Actually, they are the square and the compass symbols of Freemasonry. Quote, Joseph Smith had been initiated about 7 weeks prior to his introduction to the endowment ceremony. So 7 weeks prior to him coming up with this whole thing, he just got done going through the Mormon ritual, which does the same, or the Freemason ritual, which does the same thing. The V-shaped symbol on the left breast is referred to as the compasses. The reverse L-shaped symbol on the right breast referred to by the early church leaders as, quote, the square. Hello. Okay. And then I'll have time to get into it. But basically, at night, remember, you're supposed to, don't touch it. This is it. This is sacred. Used to be the old Union suit all the way here, all the way down, right? Don't touch it. Secret magic underwear, so to speak. Wear it the rest of your life. You can't mess with it. Well, they started messing with it, right? That's why you're supposed to not touch it. What are you doing? It's got to stay the same. And this is supposed to be legit. Well, in 1923, LDS President Heber Grant stated that after prayerful consideration, that the leadership unanimously decided that specific modifications would be permitted to the garments. Sleeves could end at the elbow, remember, because they went all the way here, all the way down to the ankles, and the lace could be shortened just below the knee, okay, and you could use buttons instead of strings, and they eliminated the open crotch. They closed that up. Well, wait a second, I thought it was supposed to stay the same way and whatever, but now you're making adjustments on it. Okay. Other changes were made in 1923, which shortened the sleeves and legs and then eliminated the buttons. Then in 1930, the LDS built the, listen, beehive clothing mills. Now, of all names for you to, and the clothing mills is responsible for manufacturing and selling these secret garments, supposed secret garments. Now, of all names for you to call this garment that was ripped off from Freemasonry, you use a Freemasonry term. Beehive is a big giant symbol in Freemasonry. And that's what you name this place that makes these things. Anyway, in the church's handbook, they tell you have to wear these garments day and night and quote that they should not alter them. But they keep altering them. And they continue to do it even today. In the 70s, they made another alteration. Basically, it went into the first two-piece garment. Because it used to be one big old jumper jammy. Right? Now it's two-piece. And basically, I think people are like, because you have to keep this underneath your normal outfit and you have to hide it from other people. They can't know that you're wearing this, right? Especially unbelievers. So it's like walking around in Vegas with two sets of clothes on, and they still do it today. We had some neighbors that used to live not too far from us, and the lady would never wear shorts. You know why? Because she had her secret garment on. And she would always wear these ones that look like, the shorts that come just over the knee. That's as low as she would get. Why? Because it was just long enough to cover her outfit in the middle of summer in Vegas. So, anyway, but also, that's the garments that got special handsakes, the moon signal, and this is Freemasonry and Mormonism, the new names given, and the bloody oath. Both have the bloody oath. Okay, again, this is nothing new. Joseph Smith just ripped it off. Now, this is the Freemasonry initiation ritual, which is another sign. Run. How did you even make it this far? But if they start putting you through this ritual, run. What Christian would be a part of this? This is the ritual. The Mason, in order to get into the lodge, this is the very beginning, the first three steps, the initiates. The Mason must go through an initiation process where they're blindfolded, run, a noose is then put around your neck, double run, leave, don't stop. You know what? Okay, then you're led with a sword to your chest into triple run into the inner room of the lodge where an altar is set up. Behind the altar stands the guy called the worshipful master. He's the master of the lodge, and he presides over the initiation ceremony. All prospective Masons must bow before the worshipful master and say the following, quote, and you're supposed to be a Christian, and this, you let this come out of your mouth? quote, I am lost in darkness and I need the light of Freemasonry. Excuse me? Jesus is the light of the world. You say you belong to him? You're renouncing that. What are you doing? Following this declaration, the initiate is required to take a blood oath swearing allegiance to the lodge and pledging to protect all the secrets of Masonry. This blood oath is repeated by every Mason who has joined the lodge. It goes like this: binding myself under no less penalty than having my throat cut across, my tongue, and they use the thumb, they got the whole ritual, and my tongue torn out by its roots, buried in the rough of the sea, etc., etc. And they have to keep doing this as they continue to go up ceremonies, okay? And of course, we'll get into that much later with that whole thing. But here's my point. Joseph Smith, did you know, also has a ritual in this ceremony ritual that he just came up with 7 weeks after he became a Freemason. And I quote, participants were asked, this is 1842, to take oath of secrecy regarding the gestures of their ceremony, the Mormon ceremony. And the participants promised that if they were ever to reveal the gestures of the ceremony, they would be subject to the following. Quote, my throat would be cut from ear to ear, my tongue torn out by its roots, our breasts would be torn open, our hearts and vials torn out and given to the birds and the beasts of the field, and our body cut asunder and our bowels gushed out. Gee, I wonder where he got that from. Not just a liar, not just a storyteller. Like you think, well, that's a guy, he's a great science fiction writer. He came up with that. What an imagination. I don't even know how much imagination we had. He's a good plagiarist. I'll give him that. But he's taken a little bit from this, a little bit here or there, mix and match it. And this is supposed to be the best account of anything better than the Bible. By reading the Book of Mormon, you will have the best opportunity to get closer to God than any other book on the planet. You got to be kidding me. Okay? So he ripped that out. But again, that's the same thing that you find in Freemasonry. Again, he took that from Freemasonry. And real quick, they also have stars, symbols, sun symbols, tabernacles, and temples. Okay, now, there's so many Masonic rituals that are the same in Mormonism, so many Masonic symbols, even on the structures of the Mormon temples, etc., still to this day. I want to quote to you an LDS author wrote, this is from their own camp, they even admit it. So listen to this. He says, quote, Masons who visit the temple block in Salt Lake City are impressed by what they call the Masonic emblems displayed on the outside of the Mormon temple. Yes, the Masonic emblems are displayed on the walls of the temple: the sun, moon, and stars, the two right hands clasped in fellowship, the all-seeing eye, and the beehive. Masonic writers tell us that the Mormon temple ritual and their own are similar. Quote, without any apologies, this is the Mormon guy writing this, we frankly admit that there may be some truth to these statements. Oh. So they even admit it. It's so similar, you can't hide it, right? The guy didn't even, this is supposed to be all a new word from God, a better revelation, a new revelation of Jesus Christ. This is the best thing on the planet. The guy ripped it off. The guy ripped it off. It's absolutely crazy, okay? He borrowed the whole thing from Mason. In fact, even as recently in spring 2002, they rebuilt the Nauvoo Temple in Illinois, because originally, when it was built in the 1840s, it was destroyed after they left the town. So they recently rebuilt the thing. And guess what they rebuilt the thing with? Masonic. Still to this day, you think, well, that was just back then. They don't do that anymore. No, they're still doing it. Right? This is embedded in Mormonism. The Nauvoo Temple weather vane shows the Masonic symbol, the compass, and the square above the angel Moroni is one example. They also have the sun stone, and Freemasonry, it's not just the sun, but it's got like a human face and things of that nature. Many Masonic symbols, the sun, moon, stars, all-seeing eye, the beehive, the hand grip, the beehive, are also placed in the Salt Lake City Temple. One of the more familiar symbols of Mormonism is the beehive, and it's used. The hive can be seen on Brigham Young's home, and they even call his house, quote, the Beehive House. Okay, and again, he wore his Masonic pin his life. They have beehive. The beehive, the Freemason beehive design is displayed on the doorknobs of the Salt Lake City Temple. Many people are aware of the symbols of the temple, but they're on all, not just the temples, they're on a ton of their buildings and structures. Endowment houses, temples, cooperatives, grave markers. You ever go and see that? Tabernacles, meeting houses, newspaper mastheads, hotels, residences, money, logos, and seals. Okay. And again, in addition to these symbols, this is wild. The LDS Church continues to use the upside down 5-pointed star. You know what that's called in the occult? The pentagram. The newly completed Nauvoo Temple that I just told you recently, said, oh, that was just back then, they kind of weird. No. Okay, has numerous windows using the pentagram. The inverted star was also used on the Salt Lake Temple above the front doors. If you ever want to come up here, I got pictures of it that you can click and see it to this day. It's also above the upper arch windows on the north and south sides on the Eagle Gate Monument over the State Street of South Temple in Salt Lake City. It's also, and I'm talking the pentagram, it's also on the planter boxes in front of the statue in the Salt Lake Visitor Center, and it's on the front entrance upper left-hand corner of the LDS Historical Museum west of the Temple Square. Now, there's also another group of people who's big on using the pentagram, and again, we'll get into this later, okay, just before Freemasonries, and they just happen to be, guess who? Satanists, okay? That's a big giant symbol for Satanists. And this is their words, not mine. Listen to this. Since the LDS Church rejects the use of the cross as a religious symbol, stop right there. Have you ever noticed? You never, and you never will, find the Christian cross anywhere on a Mormon edifice. If you notice, they have a spire, but guess what's never there? Never a cross, right? But he said this, since the LDS Church rejects the use of the cross as a religious symbol, one is left to wonder, why would they adopt symbols used by Masons and Satanists? Interesting. So then, and that was just the pentagram. So I decided to do a little bit more study. I said, are you serious? So is it just that one item from Satanism that you got? I mean, you're going right down the list with Masons. But Satanists too? Maybe that tells you a little where the inspiration came from. Well, listen to this. This is a parallel of Satanists, Masons, and Mormons. Here's just some general similarities. In Satanists, you go through a ritual, you're reduced to nude, okay? And you're covered, in Satanists, covered with a black shield. Masons, same thing, okay? And Mormons, the same thing. And it's probably they get your new clothes on, stuff, whatever, except they use a, quote, white shield. I guess that makes it better. Right? It's kind of like people say, well, I only practice white magic. I don't do black magic. Still magic. But anyway, Satanists have the ceremony of washing and anointing the body performed. All three, same thing. Satanists use also a secret name. Same thing. Masons, Mormons. Satanists also have a claim to the Melchizedek priesthood. We've heard that before. Masons, also Mormons. All three use an altar. All three use the apron. Satanists use an apron. Theirs is green, okay, worn by a guy named the Pontiff. Mormons have an apron. It's white, but guess what color the Mormons use? Green. They don't call him Pontiff. He's the patron. They all three have the specific hand clasp that they do. They all do this secret oath with the secret hand clasp. They also have the bloody oath, all three. You get the death penalty if you reveal any of these secrets. The Satanist ultimate goal is to progress to godhood. What's that sound like? Mormonism, to progress to godhood. And of course, Satanists practice communication with the dead. And guess what Mormons do? And they really think, Mormons, we'll get into that later, Lord willing, think that they're talking to the dead. Same thing with symbols. All three, Satanists, Masons, Mormons, all have the sun symbol, the moon symbol, stars, pentagrams, compass square, and the all-seeing eye. All three straight across the board. And guess who also does the 5 points of fellowship? Not just Masons. That Joseph Smith ripped it off. Remember that? The foot to foot, knee to knee, and all that stuff? Satanists do the 5 point of fellowship as well. That's kind of interesting as well. Man, we are out of time. And I was going to just tell you, we talked about this name Mormon, where it came from, right? Well, when you start getting into the occult factor here, watch this. Do you know where this other big name they use came from? Not just the word Mormon, but their supposed angel, these golden plates, supposedly came from Moroni. You know where that name came from? We'll have to deal with that next week, Tom. That's right. And it has to do with the occult. Shocker. Well, hi, this is Pastor Billy Crone of Sunrise Baptist Church and Get a Life Ministries.
Hello?
Hello.
Hello? Okay. um, okay, I'm gonna end it here. I'll probably do one more stream today because it's only 5. I'm gonna take a break and then I'll stream a bit later, but I hope this was interesting. All right, I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.